If right now your life feels like a map without a legend, clear roads that suddenly stop, doors that close without explanation, a steady ache that no schedule or success seems to fix, hear this plainly. Your confusion is not meaningless. There is a message threaded through the weariness, a kind of whisper beneath the noise. The invitation of this moment is to discover the divine message behind your current struggles. You might be waking up each morning and performing the motions, work, family, the familiar checklist, while inside something else has shifted. It could be a small change at first, a prayer that used to carry warmth now feels thin, a project that used to excite you feels heavy. The old defenses that used to steady you stop working and leave you raw. Maybe you've tried explanations, blame yourself, blame others, blame timing. You've looked for signs, for a single cause you can fix. The truth is simpler and stranger. Not every hard thing is primarily a problem to be solved. Some hard things are a kind of workmanship. If those words land inside you as a relief, even for a moment, do something small and human. Type a single line in the comments, "God is working even when I don't understand." Let that be a tiny practice of trust. It's not about performance. It's about placing a marker in your own day that says, "I will look for what God might be saying here." Most of our lives are taught by force. Pain presses and we react. We measure things by outcomes. Did it work? Are we better? Did the problem resolve? In that economy, suffering is a malfunction, a signal that something is broken. But there is another way to read certain seasons, as formation. Problems require solutions, processes require patience. The difference matters because it changes how you respond to the same facts. A problem screams for action. A process invites presence. A problem demands proof. A process asks for endurance. When what you face is a process, an invisible reordering of how you feel, think, love, and choose, your posture shifts from frantic fixing to careful stewardship. You learn to tend what you can tend, your attention, your small daily rhythms, the inner conversations you allow yourself to have. Imagine a seed beneath the soil. To the eye, nothing is happening. The gardener who has seen this before knows otherwise. Roots are forming, delicate tissues are gathering strength, a shoot is aligning itself for an eventual break through the surface. That subterranean work is silent, and the seed cannot force growth to appear faster. The only way through that season is to honor what's happening underground, to believe that silence can be depth-building rather than the worst possible sign. This is the first and most tender truth I want to name for you. Silence does not equal abandonment. God's methods are often quieter than our expectations. He may work in forms you don't notice until days, months, or years later. That does not make his work less real, it makes it subtle. You may ask, but is this always true? Could my struggle be punishment or simply consequence? Those are honest questions. The Bible doesn't flatten the complexity of suffering. It gives examples of suffering as consequence, consequence as correction, and suffering as redemptive formation. We must not turn the internal world into a moral scoreboard, assigning guilt where there may be none. Nor should we flatten every hardship into a spiritual bypass, another place to plaster over pain with pious phrases. Instead, ask a different question. What might God be doing inside me through this? Not to excuse wrongdoing or to romanticize pain, but to learn to read the deeper grammar of what is being formed. The posture the heart learns in these seasons, humble waiting, careful noticing, gentle boundaries, often becomes the very capacity needed for what is coming next. The skill of being present to your small, honest feelings, of naming fear without letting it dictate, of stepping away from patterns that used to sustain you. These are the craftspeople of inner change. You are not late. You are not broken beyond repair. You might feel stalled, but stalled is not the same as stuck forever. There is a difference between being delayed and being prepared. Not a delay, preparation. Repeat that phrase slowly in your mind as you read, not a delay, preparation. You might need that as an anchor when days get long and hope seems thin. Now, to make this less abstract, I want to tell you about someone whose life reads like a long, cruel interruption and yet reveals the pattern I'm trying to describe. His story is not yours in every detail, no one's is, but it resonates with the shape of many seasons: promise, rupture, hidden formation, eventual vindication. The man is Joseph. Joseph's story begins with a simple, dangerous favor. He was loved by his father in a way that made his siblings resentful. He had dreams, visions really, that sketched him into a future that lifted him above his present reality. Those dreams were not haughty fantasies but promises. One day he would stand in a place of influence where others would bow. Imagine the mixture of hope and embarrassment that produces in a young man, the fire of destiny tempered by envy that others feel toward you. That envy did not stay polite. The narrative spirals quickly from family tension to a betrayal so sharp it becomes a hinge. His own brothers stripped him of his coat, a symbol of status and protection, and sold him as a slave to traders going to Egypt. Think about the speed of that descent. One day you're at the center of a family's orbit. The next, you are ripped from the only world you've known and carried into a foreign land. If you have ever experienced a sudden dislocation, loss of job, a relationship that unravels, a reputation damaged, you know the vertigo of being thrust into unchosen solitude. You begin to ask the same questions Joseph might have asked. Where is God in this? Did I mishear the promise? Did I misstep? In Egypt, Joseph's life moved through compartments that seemed designed to prove he had been derailed. He found himself not in the open field of influence, but inside the household of Potiphar, an Egyptian official. There he worked and earned trust. He managed the house and stewarded the resources of a foreign household. This is important. Sometimes formation happens inside places we label as lesser. Being faithful in the small, unseen responsibilities, the kind that attract no applause, may be the only way to learn the disciplines you need later. Potiphar's house was not the promised land, but it was not nothing either. It was a field for the growth of skill, character, and resilience. Yet the road did not narrow to smoothness. From the relative stability of service, Joseph was battered by false accusation. His integrity was twisted into an offense, and he was thrown into prison. Imagine the shock of being punished in the absence of guilt, the bewilderment of injustice that gives no explanation. That kind of suffering creates a particular kind of silence. God does not thunder from the heavens to clear your name. The world continues to misread you. In those days, a person can collapse into bitterness, or they can endure and let the endurance itself remake them. Joseph did not magically emerge from prison as though nothing had happened. He moved through seasons where his competence was hidden, where his training, interpreting dreams, organizing for the future, was not yet obvious to anyone who could use it. Contentment did not come quickly. Resilience grew in the dark. The very skills he honed in obscurity, steadiness, a refined sense of discernment, a capacity to listen, later became the tools for greater service. What looked like derailment was quietly rearranging the architecture of his soul. Do you see the pattern? Promise does not equal immediate ascent. Promise often passes through broken seasons that look like reversals. The divine message inside those reversals is not always a timetable for success. Sometimes it is a curriculum. God's schooling can include humiliation, exile, false accusation, and abandonment by those we expected would stand with us. That schooling humbles the heart and stretches capacity. It forces tenderness where hardness might have ruled. It teaches discernment where impulsiveness might have remained. But how do you know when what you are in is a process and not merely a problem? How do you learn to read the signs of inner formation when the outer circumstances shout for immediate correction? Start by watching your reactions. When something pushes against you now, do you rage and spin, looking for quick fixes? Or do you notice a small pause before your reply, an increased capacity to hold your tongue rather than strike back? The latter is often the first understated sign that something is changing inside. Before the new story becomes visible, the old reflexes begin to die. Watch your boundaries. People who are being formed often start practicing healthier edges. It might be as simple as saying no to an extra task that drains you, or as brave as refusing to be present for conversations that wound you again and again. These are not petty acts of pride. They are acts of spiritual maturity. They establish the conditions in which growth can happen. Listen to your self-talk. The internal voice becomes less condemnatory and more curious. Instead of an immediate cascade of blame, "I failed again. I'm not good enough," you begin to notice a softer way of speaking. "That was hard. What can I learn here?" This shift is not inevitable. It is cultivated by practice and by a willingness to be gentle with yourself. It is also a sign that the formation is taking root. Note the small, steady wins. Did you sleep one night without the grinding anxiety that used to chase you? Did you respond to a provocation with quiet instead of heat? Did you hold firm to a commitment when every temptation said to abandon it? These tiny moments are the scaffolding of transformation. They are the errands the heart runs on long afternoons while no one is looking, building strength that will someday bear public weight. And notice the company you keep. Formation rarely happens in hermit-like isolation. It is often tenderly held in community. A friend who listens without fixing, a pastor who prays without cliché, a small group that offers both truth and mercy. Community is not a panacea, but it is a soil rich with nutrients for growth. If you are in a season of hidden forming, resist the temptation to withdraw utterly. Seek safe places where you can be known, where your story can be reflected back with clarity and compassion. It is also crucial to remember that formation includes regressions. You will have good days and bad days. You will make mistakes. Growth is not linear. Sometimes the very thing you've been practicing, gentleness, patience, setting a boundary, will fall away for a moment under pressure. This does not mean you've failed the process. It means you are human. Be kind enough to start again. There is a posture that holds all these practices together. Patient, deliberate presence. Presence is less about frantic activity and more about faithful reliability. It is showing up to your own life in small ways, keeping a morning practice, taking walks that let you breathe without distraction, reading scripture not as a hammer, but as a way to steady your gaze. Presence makes the heart a place where God can do interior surgery without panic. When you begin to cultivate presence, you start to notice the subtler languages God uses. He speaks through small shifts in your desires, through a new sensitivity in your conscience, through an increased tenderness for other people's suffering. These are not loud headline-grabbing signs, they are the quiet footfalls of a hand at work inside. At this point, I want to slow and ask you something honest. Have you ever found that a promise in your life seemed to move backward, appearing and then disappearing in a way that felt like defeat? If so, you are in familiar company. Joseph's dreams were not nullified by his betrayal. The dreams were the promise that required formation to sustain them. But formation did not look like a straight highway. It looked like a descent into hardship and a long interior labor in unexpected places. Think of Joseph for a moment, not as an ancient hero distant from your circumstances, but as a mirror for the shape of your suffering. He was a young man who imagined a future and was then pushed into the kind of education that only pain and exile can produce. He learned how to manage resources, how to interpret deeper layers of meaning, how to hold integrity under pressure. Those skills did not arrive because someone announced his destiny. They emerged from fidelity in the small. They matured in obscurity. This is where many of us stumble. We give up the small practices because nothing outwardly seems to be happening. But the tiny daily things are the compost from which larger fruit grows. The discipline of prayer that runs on long after prayer no longer feels heroic is, in fact, the seed of steadiness. The kind, repeated refusal to return to toxic patterns is the architect of future endurance. Keep doing the small things. In time, if God is at work in your story, those small things will show themselves to be the true curriculum. And yet, even as you practice these things, expect paradox. Formation is not always comfortable or predictable. It may involve seasons where your integrity complicates your options. Joseph's truthfulness in Potiphar's house led to false accusation. Timing is not always on our side. The divine message behind your struggle may include calling you to a fidelity that looks foolish for a season. That does not make the call wrong. It simply makes your standing in the world more costly and thereby more faithful. So how do you hold faith and caution at the same time? How do you remain open to God's shaping in your life without embracing spiritual romanticism that celebrates suffering as inherently good. You do this by naming both realities. This is hard and this may be formative. You grieve what you have lost, and you also tend to what is being made. You do not rush to meaning. You allow meaning to settle into you like sediment after a storm. Look for the quiet signs. They may arrive as a new restraint when someone speaks sharply to you. They may appear as a gentle capacity to accept the limits of your control. They may show up as a renewed love for people, for your work, for prayer. That is less about performance and more about companionship. These are the tokens that formation has been at work. Remember the phrase again. Discover the divine message behind your current struggles. That discovery is not a one-time revelation. It is an ongoing apprenticeship. You will graduate from some lessons and then be placed in others. The heart is scalable. It is meant to be trained gradually to carry increasing weight without becoming brittle. One more tender caution. Do not confuse endurance with pride. Endurance that brags about its suffering is not the endurance you are being invited into. The heart you are forming should be both strong and merciful. It should be capable of holding pain without using it as a banner. True formation bends toward humility, not toward an exhibition of endurance. By now you may be wondering, where will this lead? Will the work ever surface? Will the promises be fulfilled? We look at Joseph and find an arc that carries eventual vindication, but his vindication was not an automatic consequence of his suffering. It was the result of a series of small fidelities, exercised in the dark, that later became useful in a new context. That is the tension you hold. You do not assume future success, but you prepare for it by cultivating what is true and steady now. Let me return for a moment to Joseph's specific journey, because it helps to see the details of how formation can be disguised as calamity. After being sold into slavery, Joseph found himself in a household where his character was recognized. He was entrusted with responsibilities. His competence was noticed. Yet competence in comfort is not the same as faithfulness in trial. When he faced false accusation, his name was tarnished. He did not have a public vindication immediately. Instead, he was placed in prison, which is as close to invisible as public life can get. The skills he had, organization, discernment, humility, were not wasted there. Even in confinement, he interpreted dreams, he listened, and he served those he met. Think about the spiritual logic of that season. God did not bypass the necessary training. If Joseph had been thrown directly from his father's house to the Pharaoh's palace, he might have been unprepared for the weight of governance. The interim seasons, Potiphar's house, the prison, were crucibles. Crucibles are not signs of abandonment. They are signs that heat is being applied for refinement. Here is another practical word for the one who is tired. Name the rhythm. Make a short list, only you will see it, of 3 small practices you will keep this week. They can be simple. 10 uninterrupted minutes of prayer in the morning, a short walk without podcasts, a single conversation with a trusted friend where you speak honestly. These are small bets on presence. They are not restart buttons that make everything right. They are commitments to the soil in which growth occurs. Also, give yourself permission to grieve. When the world removes a role, a relationship, or a dream, grief is legitimate. Do not rush past sorrow to get to hope, as though the one invalidates the other. Grief and hope can be companions. They often are in the lives of those being formed. I want to make one final point before we move further into Joseph's story. The process of formation is not neutral. It changes desires. It changes the way you pray. The prayers of someone in formation shift from bargaining to longing, from a long list of what must happen to asking, Lord, make me faithful in the small. This is not lesser prayer. It is more honest prayer. It aligns your heart with the work that is actually possible for you today. Now, as we follow Joseph a little further, watch how the seemingly random elements of his life, dreams, betrayal, foreign houses, prison, begin to assemble into a particular training. After some years, Joseph was given an opportunity to interpret the peculiar dreams of men who were prisoners with him. That ability, exercised in obscurity, later becomes a bridge to a public stage. The dreams he once had were not annulled by his suffering. They were being recontextualized through the hard lessons he had learned. The insights he had developed, discernment, patience in waiting, the ability to hold meaning when others could not, became the apparatus by which the promise could be stewarded. As you listen to this, maybe you see parallels. Perhaps a skill you learned in a hard season is now the very thing people need, or perhaps the patience you cultivated means you can hold a future blessing without being overwhelmed by it. The heart that has been hardened by suffering often becomes brittle. The heart that has been softened by faithful endurance becomes a vessel for stewardship. At this point, let us linger in the tension of Joseph's middle chapter, the moment when a dreamer, reduced to a prisoner, continues to interpret dreams not as a way to score points, but as an act of service. He does not possess his destiny as tangible success in that season, but he continues to practice the habits of discernment and integrity as if what he does matters, even when no one sees. If you are in a place of obscurity, practice what you can practice well. Serve in small ways. Do them as offerings, not as calculations. And yet, the story does not move forward without its risks. Joseph's capacity for faithfulness was tested again and again, and the dangers of bitterness or self-pity were constant companions. Integrity can be lonely. It can also look foolish in a world hungry for shortcuts. You will be tempted to take the shortcut. You will be offered easier paths. Watch how you respond. The practice of saying no to immediate gratification preserves your capacity for future responsibility. We will pause here, but not because there is nothing left. Joseph's story continues, and so does the pattern for any soul who wants to discover the divine message behind their struggles. There are further scenes where providence intersects with politics, where wisdom is finally called upon and used, where hidden training meets public need. For now, return to the quiet habits you can keep, the small disciplines, the steady presence, the refusal to bitterly narrate your suffering into a permanent identity. Your season of formation is real, though often invisible. Trust the quiet work of God to shape you. Keep tending the roots, not a delay, preparation, not a delay, preparation, not a delay, preparation. When the day came that Pharaoh's dreams would be told, the threads of Joseph's life, dreams, slavery, trust under trial, hidden wisdom, came together in a way that would have seemed impossible to the ear that had listened only for immediate answers. A forgotten cupbearer remembered a man who had not used his gifts for self-advancement, but had quietly offered meaning to someone else's confusion. That memory became the hinge, an overheard name, a referral, a moment when something small, faithfully done in obscurity, allowed a door to open. When Joseph stood before Pharaoh, it was not as one who had finally earned celebrity by clinging to his destiny. He stood as a man who had learned how to interpret dreams by listening, by practice, by patience. He listened to images, 7 fat cows eaten by 7 gaunt cows, 7 full ears consumed by 7 thin ears, and when he spoke, he did so with the humility of someone who had been shaped by years of having his life misunderstood and his motives mistrusted. He did not claim that the dreams were a magical guarantee. He read them and offered counsel. Prepare, steward, multiply the grain in seasons of plenty so that the lean seasons could be weathered. Pharaoh's response was not a prophetic decree about Joseph's worth. It was a practical appointment. Joseph moved from prison to palace, from obscurity to public responsibility. The elevation was concrete, sudden, and full of new pressures. Yet notice what had changed inside him. The ability to steward abundance without letting it make him brittle, the capacity to organize on a scale he had only imagined, the steadiness to hold justice and mercy in tension as he governed resources for those who would suffer in the famine to come. There are 2 lessons in that last arc that matter for you today. First, formation is functional. The internal reordering you experience in quiet seasons is not mere self-help. It is practical training for tasks you cannot imagine yet. What you are learning to do now, listen, refrain from reactive speech, hold faith in face of injustice, be faithful in small responsibilities. These are the muscles you will need when a different sphere of influence opens. Second, vindication, when it comes, is not only for your ease, it is for service. Joseph's rise was not so that he might bask in reversal, but so that he could save many lives in a famine beyond his own household. That is a pattern. The fruit of formation is often communal. If you are listening and thinking, "That's wonderful in theory. My life feels like prison, not palace," hear this plain word. It is precisely in the seasons that feel like prison that the muscle for stewardship is built. The prison of Joseph's story is a metaphor for all the places where your work is unseen, uncelebrated, and misunderstood. There, if you practice faithfulness, you slowly become someone who can carry weight without being wrecked by it. I want to name a few practical ways to steward that training, translated from Joseph's season into your daily life. These are practices that tend roots, not quick-fix growth hormones. Choose a handful, not all at once, and treat them as the crafts of an apprentice. First, the practice of small, faithful competence. Joseph did not refuse mundane tasks. He did them well. For you, that may mean showing up reliably where you are employed, doing the work you've been given with diligence even when it feels unrewarding, or stewarding the small responsibilities in your family with presence. Competence in the small disciplines your day requires is the true currency of trust. It is one thing to be gifted in potential. It is another to be trusted with the affairs of daily life. Second, cultivate attentive listening. Joseph's gift turned on his capacity to hear the language of dreams. Your gift will often reveal itself in your increased ability to hear what people are not saying. Practice asking one clarifying question in conversations. Practice listening without preparing your defense or your advice. These are small shifts, but they change your posture from proving to receiving, from acting to understanding. Third, keep a journal of the invisible shifts. Not everything becomes visible quickly. Make a small record, one sentence each evening of a way you resisted an old habit, or a moment where you noticed peace instead of panic. Over months you will be surprised by the shape that emerges. If you cannot do this alone, share a weekly note with a trusted friend, one short sentence, and ask them to do the same. Community amplifies noticing. Fourth, practice setting limits and keeping them. Boundaries are not unspiritual. They are the form by which your vocation is preserved. Saying no to an extra request that would drain you is not selfishness if it protects your capacity to love and serve well. Learn to say the briefest, kindest refusal you can muster. Practice it in small places first. The muscle will hold you in larger ones. Fifth, nurture rhythm over intensity. Joseph's life was not made of one heroic day, but of routine fidelity. Build a weekly rhythm, a morning practice of stillness, even 5 minutes, an evening where you disconnect, a weekly Sabbath that refuses productivity for restoration. Rhythm protects the soul and creates a horizon against which patience can hold. Sixth, commit to safe confessional friendships. Not every friend can carry the work you carry. Seek a handful of people who can be both tender and truthful, who will listen to the ugly parts and not try to immediately fix them, who will name what they see without shaming you. Community that both comforts and corrects is rare but indispensable. Seventh, steward your body. Formation is not only spiritual, it is embodied. Sleep, nourishment, movement, these are not indulgences, they are basic conditions of resilience. A fatigued heart is more likely to become brittle. A tended body holds suffering differently. Eighth, learn to lament and to rejoice. The Psalms are full of both. When things are brutal, cry honestly to God. When a small grace arrives, a phone call, a clear morning, a good meal, thank God without minimizing the pain. Both grief and gratitude are honest languages that keep you in touch with reality. Ninth, avoid spiritual romanticism. Do not begin to imagine suffering as a badge or as titillation. Formation includes pain, but pain is not the point. God does not adore suffering. The point is the transformation that may come through faithfulness in the midst of pain. Live honestly, name your limits, seek help when needed, and pursue healing as well as endurance. 10th, consider professional help when the load is clinical. If the weight you carry is interfering with your ability to function, sleeping, working, relating, reach for trained help. Therapy or pastoral counseling is not a shortcut or a sign of spiritual failure. It is a resource, a place where formation can be accompanied by skilled care. This is an important pastoral boundary. Spiritual formation and clinical care often work together. Now, alongside these practices, learn to recognize the quiet indicators of your interior change. We named some earlier. Let me expand with concrete questions you can ask yourself each week to monitor the interior climate. When provoked, do you find a 30-second pause before responding? If yes, note it as growth. Are you increasingly able to tell someone, "I'm not ready to talk about that," and mean it with calmness rather than shame? If yes, celebrate the boundary. Has your language about yourself softened from condemnation to curiosity? Replace "I failed" with "That was hard, what can I learn?" and watch the inner transformation. Do you find yourself more present to the needs of others without emptying yourself? This indicates a maturing capacity for empathy. Has your prayer shifted from a list of demands toward a steady request for faithfulness? This is a sign of deepening trust. Are you making small, consistent investments, journaling, a brief walk, a conversation, that you keep? These are the seeds of a future harvest. Track these markers not for performance, but for clarity. The goal is not to tally wins, but to notice trajectory. Formation is slow and often invisible until you look back and see that the slope has changed. Let me tell 2 short, modern parables that might help this land in you. They are not Joseph's story. They are small, ordinary echoes. Maya was a nurse who had always thought her destiny was to lead a clinic. She trained hard, took initiative, and opened herself to responsibility. Then the hospital downsized, and she lost her position. The loss felt like a cancellation of calling. She moved through months of temp work, feeling invisible, but in those months she began listening with new attention to patients who were lonely, learned how to manage complex schedules with limited resources, and practiced calm under conditions of scarcity. When an opportunity arrived to help design a community health outreach years later, her capacity for organizing scarce resources and tending vulnerable people made her uniquely qualified. Her season of loss had been a preparation for a broader stewardship that would not have been possible had she been immediately promoted. Daniel was a small business owner whose dream was to open a cafe. He poured savings into the project, but a health crisis closed the plan for a season. During the waiting, he discovered a joy in simple hospitality, hosting neighbors, listening to stories, and learning patience. When the cafe did open years later, it became a refuge for many. His own trials had taught him how to create space that could hold others' sorrows and joys. The hardship had rearranged his desires from fame to serviceability. He now named success by the number of lives held, not by profits alone. Both of these examples reflect Joseph's pattern. The outward loss did not cancel the inner work. It redirected and refined it. These small stories are not blueprints. They are invitations to imagine how your current narrowing may someday be the way you are shaped to serve. Now I want to speak to one of the most tender and treacherous temptations in this season, the temptation to narrate your suffering into identity. It is easy to say, if I have suffered so much, then this is who I am. Bitter, damaged, weak, a perpetual victim. That narrative can become a chain. But formation invites a different story. I have been shaped. I carry scars, but I refuse to let them define my operating system. You can hold your story without letting it monopolize your future. This requires an intentional practice of reauthoring. Each week write one sentence that names both truth and trajectory. For example, I lost my job, which was real and painful. I am learning to manage finances and to listen more deeply. Make that a small habit. Over time, the sentence becomes the frame through which you see yourself. It is not denial. It is an act of stewardship. Another powerful practice: create margins for curiosity. You do not need to know the final meaning of your season to explore new interests that might be clues to future calling. Take a short course in something that fascinates you. Volunteer in a small role that stretches a different muscle. These margin activities are not escape. They are laboratory spaces where God's formative work can show itself. I also want to press on the theme of kindness, toward yourself and toward others. When Joseph was elevated, he did not use his power to punish his brothers publicly in a vindictive spectacle. He managed a painful encounter with a measure of mercy and wisdom. That is not an excuse to soften justice. It is a reminder that formation often yields a capacity to hold complexity, to be honest about wrongs, yet to act in ways that build rather than merely hurt. Kindness is not softness to manipulation, it is disciplined generosity. There will be moments when the temptation to control is overwhelming. You will feel a rush to make things happen, to accelerate the promise. Resist that urge not by passivity, but by faithful action in the present. Tend what you can, be honest where you must, and let the rest remain in the hands of God. Patience is not simply waiting, it is active trust. Now let me turn to a question many of you may be asking under your breath. How do I actually hear the divine message behind my struggles? The answer is both simple and deep. You do it by cultivating a posture of listening and by testing what you hear against faithful practices. First, learn to listen inside the ordinary rhythms of life. God's voice often comes through small stirrings, an unexpected compassion, a consistent longing, a conviction to stop doing something that has harmed you. Test these stirrings. Bring them to prayer, to a trusted friend, to Scripture. Do they align with mercy, humility, and truth? If so, experiment with small steps. Second, give language to your experiences. Too often we feel internal shifts but have no words. Naming is sacramental. Call the shift what it feels like. I sense a shrinking of ambition. I am noticing a tenderness for the weak. I feel a caution about returning to old patterns. Language anchors what could otherwise disperse into vague unease. Third, ask God for wisdom in small things. Joseph did not leap into governance, he practiced in small offices. Pray for clarity about the next manageable decision, a conversation to have, a boundary to set, a hobby to explore. Wisdom for the small often leads to wisdom for the large. Fourth, be willing to be misunderstood. Joseph was misunderstood repeatedly. Being faithful does not guarantee immediate comprehension from others. Some will read your life with their own anxieties. That is part of the cost of formation. Practice a posture where you do not need everyone's approval to proceed in integrity. Fifth, remember that divine messages can come in the form of limits. Sometimes God says, "No," by the closed door. Learn to read closures as redirections rather than indictments. A closed door may be an invitation to a different room of service. Sixth, keep a theological humility. Do not rush to universalize your interpretations. When you think you hear God, bring your impressions to Scripture and to a trusted guide. If something sounds extravagant, promising wealth, shortcutting repentance, test it carefully. True spiritual formation increases caution toward grandiose claims and increases love toward the neighbor. Now let us return, one final time, to the heart of the matter. Discovering the divine message behind your current struggles is not an intellectual exercise. It is a way of living, a posture of attentive endurance that expects meaning without coercing it. It holds pain honestly and refuses to let pain become the god of the house. To help you practice this posture in daily life, I offer a weekly template you can adapt. It is not prescriptive but practical, a scaffold for those who want habits rather than merely inspiration. Monday, a 5-minute inventory. Where is your energy? What triggered you this past week? Name one boundary to implement. Tuesday, an act of competence. Attend to a small mundane task with complete attention. Wednesday, a 1-sentence journal entry. One change you noticed in yourself, softening, pause, new curiosity. Thursday, small service. Do an unremarkable kindness without announcing it. Friday, a brief conversation with a trusted friend or mentor. Share one honest thing, ask one question. Saturday, rest in some way that is non-work. Walk, be in nature, silence. Sunday, reflect on what felt life-giving and what felt draining. Offer a short prayer of thanks and a short lament for what was lost. This rhythm keeps your hands in the soil of formation. It is not a magical map, but a steady practice. There will be seasons when you are called to act publicly, like Joseph, or seasons when the work is only internal. Both are honorable. Both require humility. When public responsibility arrives, you will be tempted to think it proves God's favor. It may, But the truer test is what you do with that responsibility. Use it to serve, to protect, to provide. Elevation is a test of interior formation, not merely a reward. And when the world is unkind and your name is slandered, come back to the practices that keep you steady. Do not allow the world's noise to erase the small truths you have been cultivating. Not a delay, preparation. Not a delay, preparation. Not a delay, preparation. Before we close, let me tenderly address the question of timing and longing. The human heart hates blank horizons. We like timetables and milestones, but God's timing is not a timetable we can always read. Your longing is not a failure. It is an honest hunger. Bring your longing to God as prayer and as work. Longing, when partnered with faithful action, becomes the fuel for perseverance rather than the source of despair. I also want to remind you of a pastoral truth. Your value is not contingent on visible success. Whether you are known or unseen, whether the dreams you had are honored by the crowd or quietly tested in the dark, your worth is not measured by outcomes. A formed heart reflects God's image. That is the most important metric. Aim for fidelity, not applause. One final caution. Do not use your formation as an excuse to avoid responsibility for harm you may have caused. Formation heals us, but it also requires honesty. If you need to reconcile, do so. If you need to apologize, do not delay. Some parts of formation involve repair work with those we have damaged. That humility will prove the depth of your growth. You are not alone in your season of waiting and testing. Many have walked similar paths. Some have emerged into places of influence, not as a result of their cleverness, but because they learned to steward what they had. Others remain in quiet places, their faithfulness unseen. Both are beloved by God. As we close, hold again the central question. What is the divine message behind your current struggles? Perhaps it is a call to patient presence. Perhaps it is training for future stewardship. Perhaps it is a pruning that will eventually bear a different kind of fruit. Listen for the whispers in your heart and test them with prayer, community, and faithful practice. I want to leave you with a short pastoral benediction, words not to manipulate outcomes, but to remind you of certain truths. You are held, you are being shaped, and your small faithful acts matter. May you be granted the patience to tend what is hidden. May you have the courage to set gentle boundaries that preserve your capacity to love. May your grief be heard and your joy be celebrated. May the silence you endure become a depth in which new roots can take hold. May you in time see how the small things you have done, quiet prayers, honest conversations, faithful work, assemble into a life that can carry more than it once could. Discover the divine message behind your current struggles, not as a puzzle you must solve alone, but as a quiet apprenticeship in the way of Christ. If this message has touched you, consider returning here as you continue to learn. Let this place be a small refuge where you are invited to notice, to practice, and to be steadied. Subscribe for more reflections like this, and come back when your heart needs a reminder that you are being formed. Let us close with a short prayer. Father, you who see what is hidden and hear what we barely whisper, meet us in the quiet places. Teach our hearts to wait without despair and to work without exhaustion. Give us discernment to notice the small shifts, the courage to keep faithful in unseen tasks, and the wisdom to seek help when we are overwhelmed. Shape us by your mercy into people who can steward what we are given, who can hold grief and hope together, and who will use any restoration for the good of many. Keep us gentle, steady, and true. Amen.